Okay, so let's look at case 5 from the group work in session 11, and this seems to be in a case that was causing a lot of you a little bit of trouble, so I thought I'd make a little video to help. So we're told about a post-mortem examination that's been done on a patient who died following a collapse. They died from a cardiac cause, but they did have a lesion in the brain. And the lesion, we're told, looks a bit like a previous stroke. Now, this is actually a coronal section through the brain in the region of the lateral and third ventricles here. So this is the insular and this is the lentiform nucleus with the internal capsule and the caudate nucleus here. But I want you to assume that it is in fact a transverse section. Okay, so it is a coronal section because that's the plane that pathologists always cut in, but it's pretty much indistinguishable in this segment that we're looking at from a coronal from a transverse section. So we're going to assume that this is in fact a transverse section when it is actually a coronal section. All right, and that'll become important why we're going to assume it's a transverse section later on in the question. So we're asked about which of the Oxford classes does this stroke belong to. Well, what we've got here is a little lake of fluid, a hole in the brain, and this is a lacunae. So this is a lacunar infarct, a lacunar stroke. And we're asked about which vessels can be occluded to cause this. Well, these are, of course, the lenticulostriate vessels. So these are the lenticulostriate vessels which, when occluded, can lead to a lacunar infarct. And then we're asked about which part of the grey matter has been damaged. Now, if we just draw around the gross area of grey matter that's been damaged, it's this triangular region here that's been damaged. Okay, and that triangular region, you should know, is called the lentiform nucleus. And the lentiform nucleus is in fact composed of three distinct structures. So we have here one boundary, and about here another boundary. The superficialmost part of the lentiform nucleus is the putamen. Then we have the external segment of the globus pallidus, the GPE, and this part of the grey matter that's been affected is the internal segment of the globus pallidus, the GPI. So this is the internal segment of the globus pallidus, the GPI. That's the grey matter region that has been affected. Now, if you've forgotten what the difference between grey and white matter is, remember that grey matter does look grey when we look at the brain, and it's composed of cell bodies, dendrites and synapses, whereas white matter does appear white and is composed primarily of axons. All right? So grey matter is cell bodies, white matter is axons. And it's the globus pallidus internal segment that's been damaged by this stroke. And use a different colour to draw around the white matter. All right, so here's an important region of white matter. This is the internal capsule. All right, and actually the infarct has extended into the internal capsule. So at around about this region here, the infarct is actually on the boundary between the GPI and the internal capsule itself. And the infarct has occurred close to the genu of the internal capsule. And the genu is the place where we have upper motor neurons that supply the face. So in this case, since we have a lesion of the right genu of the internal capsule, this would lead to a left-sided facial weakness with forehead sparing. Okay? And it may well be the case that the lesion has extended a little into the posterior limb as well, and that could lead to weakness in the left upper limb. So in this case, we've got a lesion which has bounded white matter and grey matter. It's traversed white and grey matter, leading to a basal ganglia problem, as well as upper motor neuron signs in the contralateral face and probably the contralateral upper limb. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Our next question asks us to predict the effect that damage to the internal segment of the globus pallidus might have on movement. Okay, and we basically asked to work out whether there would be excessive movement or a paucity of movement. So would there be more movement or less movement as a consequence of GPI damage? So let's show what's going to be damaged, the GPI. Here we've identified that in our pathological section. Now it's really important that you don't try to overthink tasks like this, that you tackle them in a common sense way and follow your instincts. It's as much about exam technique as it is about what you know. So we've shown that the GPI has been damaged, has been lost. So all of these greeny blue boxes in this diagram represent areas of grey matter which contains the cell bodies of neurons. And all of the lines, whether black or purple, represent axons emanating from those areas of grey matter. So we have lost this important area of grey matter, the internal segment of GPI. And you can see that GPI normally projects inhibitory axons to the thalamus. So the physiological role of GPI is to inhibit the thalamus. In the case where the GPI has been destroyed, the thalamus is no longer being inhibited. Therefore, the thalamus has had the brakes taken off of it. And if you take the brakes off of the thalamus, you get increased thalamic activity and as a consequence, increased activity in the motor cortex. If you have increased activity in the motor cortex, you get increased movement. So the answer is that we get excess movement, and it's actually a condition akin to bullismus. All right, so a condition which is very closely related to bullismus, which is normally caused by destruction of the subthalamic nucleus. Okay. Logical. We're next asked to think about the white matter damage and to think about which parts of the body might have an upper motor neuron lesion. Now, to answer this about which bits of the white matter have been damaged, let's go back to the